A glamorous charity gala turns into chaos when a jealous mistress kicks the chair of a pregnant woman in front of hundreds of guests. The millionaire husband laughs while his wife lies bleeding on the marble floor, but what he doesn't know is that the cameras are rolling and the world is about to see every second of it. What follows is not just a scandal but a fight for truth, dignity, and justice that will shake the city from its highest towers to its courtrooms. Stay tuned, because when the woman in the yellow dress rises again, no one who laughed that night will walk away free. Tell us what time you're listening and where you're watching from, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. The chandeliers above the Waldorf Astoria ballroom glowed like captured suns, spilling warm light across crystal tables and golden linen. Music drifted from the orchestra stage, soft and elegant, a waltz meant for laughter and champagne, not the quiet tension that simmered beneath the polished surface. Guests in gowns and tuxedos glided through the space, their smiles rehearsed, their words as fragile as glass. Near the center of the room sat Lillian Hayes, her hand resting protectively over the curve of her belly beneath a light yellow gown that shimmered softly with each breath she took. She looked radiant but uneasy. The air carried too many eyes, too many whispers, and none of them felt kind. Her husband, Grant Hayes, the millionaire investment mogul hosting the charity event, stood a few feet away, surrounded by reporters and executives. His laughter was the loudest sound in the room, sharp and practiced, the kind of laughter that filled space rather than meaning. Lillian watched him for a moment, remembering a time when that laugh had once comforted her. Now it only reminded her of distance. "Smile," he had told her earlier through clenched teeth. "People are watching. Don't make me look bad." She had smiled then, and she was still smiling now, though it hurt. The orchestra paused for applause. Waiters drifted between tables with trays of wine. The chatter rose again, and that was when Lillian saw her. Evelyn Ross. Evelyn moved like she owned the floor, her red satin dress cutting through the room like a warning light. She was younger, confident, the kind of woman who never apologized. People whispered as she passed, but she didn't care. She wanted them to see. She wanted Lillian to see. Evelyn stopped just a few steps from Lillian's table. For a moment, neither spoke. Only the clinking of glasses filled the air. "Lovely evening," Evelyn said finally. Her tone dipped in honey but sharpened at the edges. "I wasn't sure you'd come. I told Grant it might be too much for you, with the baby and all." Lillian's fingers tightened around her napkin. "It's a charity event, not a battlefield." "Everything's a battlefield, darling," Evelyn said, leaning closer. "Especially when you've already lost." The words hit harder than Lillian expected. She tried to steady her breathing, to keep her voice calm, but her heart thudded like a drum. The eyes around them began to multiply. The room, once a blur of polite noise, now felt like a stage. Evelyn seemed to enjoy it. "Please," Lillian whispered, "not here." Evelyn's smile widened. "Why not here? Everyone should see what happens when a woman refuses to accept reality." Lillian started to rise, gripping the edge of the table for balance. Her belly made every movement slow. The chair beneath her creaked slightly. Evelyn stepped forward, her heels clicking against marble. The space between them shrank until the scent of wine and expensive perfume mingled in the air. "Evelyn," Lillian said softly, "go back to your seat." Evelyn tilted her head. "This is my seat." Before anyone could react, Evelyn's leg swung forward. The motion was sudden, violent. Her heel struck the base of the chair. The chair tipped, glass shattered. A gasp swept through the ballroom as Lillian fell backward, her body twisting, her hand instinctively clutching her stomach. The sound of impact echoed, dull and heavy against the marble floor. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the whispers exploded. "Oh my God!" someone cried. "She's pregnant!" Blood spread slowly across the hem of the yellow gown. Lillian's breath came out in short, broken gasps. Her vision blurred, the ceiling lights fractured into streaks of gold. She could hear voices, footsteps, confusion. Grant's voice cut through it all. "What the hell is this?" He pushed through the crowd, his face flushed, not with fear, but embarrassment. He glanced at Evelyn, then at his wife on the ground. "She tripped," he said flatly. "For God's sake, stop staring," someone whispered. "She didn't trip. That woman kicked her." Grant ignored them. He looked down at Lillian, his jaw tight. "Get up. You're making a scene." "Oh." Lillian tried, but pain tore through her body. She could taste iron. "Help me," she whispered. Grant didn't move. Instead, he gave a short, dismissive laugh, the same hollow sound that once filled magazine covers. "You always know how to ruin an evening." The crowd recoiled. Cameras clicked. Someone began recording on their phone. It was Martha Green, the event manager, who finally broke the paralysis. Her silver name badge caught the light as she pushed through the stunned guests. She dropped her clipboard, knelt beside Lillian, and pressed 2 fingers to her neck. "She's bleeding," Martha said sharply. "She needs an ambulance now." No one moved. "Call 911!" Martha shouted, her voice slicing through the music that had awkwardly resumed somewhere in the background. "She's losing blood!" A waiter fumbled for his phone, stammering. Martha grabbed it from him and dialed herself, speaking fast and clear. "This is the Waldorf Astoria ballroom. Pregnant woman injured. Possible abdominal trauma. Unconscious. Heavy bleeding. Send emergency medical immediately." She tossed the phone aside and cradled Lillian's head in her lap. "Stay with me, honey," she murmured. "Help's coming." Evelyn stood frozen a few feet away, her hands trembling, her lips parted as if to speak. Grant glanced toward the exit, calculating, then looked back at the watching crowd. Cameras now surrounded him. The laugh that had once commanded attention now trapped him under it. Within minutes, the wail of sirens pierced the muffled chatter. Red light began to flash against the ballroom windows. The doors burst open, and 2 paramedics rushed in with a stretcher. Martha moved aside but kept one hand on Lillian's arm. "She's in shock," one medic said. "Let's move fast." They lifted Lillian carefully, blood still staining her gown. Her eyes fluttered open for a second, unfocused. She saw the chandelier lights above, shimmering gold and crimson, and thought they looked like fire. Grant stepped back. Evelyn whispered something, but the sound drowned under the rising hum of voices and camera shutters. The paramedics wheeled the stretcher toward the door. As they passed the mirrored wall, the flashing red from the ambulance outside flooded the room. It bathed the marble, the spilled wine, the broken glass, and the fallen napkin in a haunting crimson glow. For an instant, the reflection caught Lillian's motionless body, her yellow gown glowing under the red light, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. The guests stared, silent, realizing they had witnessed something that could never be erased. Martha followed the medics to the door, whispering a prayer under her breath. The ambulance siren wailed again, echoing through the grand hotel corridors. The ballroom, once filled with music and laughter, now stood suspended in horror and disbelief. The red lights kept flashing across the floor, across the golden tables, across the empty chair that still rocked slightly on its side, waiting for the silence to end. The siren wailed through the streets of Manhattan, a long, desperate cry that bounced off the glass walls of skyscrapers. Inside the ambulance, the smell of antiseptic mixed with blood and perfume. Lillian Hayes lay strapped to the stretcher, her light yellow gown torn and darkened by stains that no one wanted to name. Her breath came unevenly, eyes half open, fixed on the ceiling lights that blinked with each turn. Every flash of red felt like thunder behind her eyelids. "Stay with me, ma'am," the paramedic said. He was young, his voice calm but urgent. "We're 5 minutes out from Street Helena General. You're going to be fine." She wanted to believe him, but the pressure inside her abdomen felt like fire. Her hand trembled as she reached toward her belly, searching for any sign of movement. "My baby," she whispered. "Please." The paramedic looked at the monitor. "Heart rate's weak but present," he said to his partner. "Keep her talking." What's your name, ma'am?" "Lillian." "All right, Lillian, just keep your eyes on me. What month are you in?" "6th." He nodded, scribbling something on a chart. "You're doing great. We'll be there soon." Outside the window, the world streaked by in flashes of light and shadow. Rain had started, thin and silver, smearing the reflections of the city across the glass. Lillian tried to hold on to a thought, any thought, that wasn't pain. But the images came uninvited. Grant's face, cold and annoyed. Evelyn's voice, sweet and venomous. The crowd that watched but did nothing. The way laughter had followed her down. She turned her head slightly, seeing another face beside her. It was Martha Green, the event manager, sitting on the jump seat with a wool coat thrown over her shoulders. Her hands were clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone white. "Hang on, sweetheart," Martha said softly. "They're waiting for us. You're safe now." Lillian's lips parted. Why did she do that? Martha hesitated. Because some people think love is power, and power makes them cruel. The ambulance hit a bump, and Lillian gasped. The paramedic checked her foreline. You're losing blood, he said quietly to his partner. We need that ER ready. The radio crackled. Street Helena General, this is Unit 47, pregnant female, approximately 30 years old, abdominal trauma with heavy bleeding. ETA 3 minutes. A voice answered. Clipped and professional. Copy that, OB/GYN and trauma team standing by. Lillian closed her eyes. She could still hear the music from the ballroom echoing in her head, muffled now, distorted. Her body felt far away, as if she were floating above it, watching everything from somewhere else. When the ambulance screeched to a halt, the back doors burst open, and the paramedics moved with the precision of a drill. Cold night air rushed in. Hands lifted her, firm but gentle, and the blur of the hospital swallowed her whole. Bright lights, white ceilings, voices shouting over each other, a nurse counting under her breath, the metallic click of instruments being laid out. Someone cut through the remains of her gown. The cool air hit her skin, sharp and sterile. She's at 32 weeks, said a woman's voice. Possible internal bleeding. Let's stabilize first. Lillian tried to speak, but the oxygen mask muffled her voice. Her heart pounded against her ribs. Then, through the chaos, she heard another voice, low, steady, commanding. Her pulse is weak but steady. Let's get a fetal Doppler now. It was Dr. Emily Carter. Lillian had seen her once before. During an earlier checkup, Grant had barely attended. Dr. Carter moved quickly, scanning the monitors, her expression unreadable. Doctor, one nurse said. Husband's in the lobby demanding to see her. Dr. Carter didn't look up. Tell him to wait. She's in critical care. The nurse hesitated. He says he's signing discharge papers. Dr. Carter's tone sharpened. Not tonight, he's not. Lillian's pulse monitor beeped faster. She could hear every word. Fear mixed with rage in her chest. The mask fogged as she whispered, Don't let him near me. Dr. Carter leaned close enough for Lillian to see the kindness in her eyes. He won't. You're safe here. For the next few minutes, everything became rhythm, commands, machines. The measured calm of people trained to battle chaos. A faint heartbeat fluttered from the monitor, tiny but defiant. There, Dr. Carter said quietly. Fetal heart rate detected. Weak but consistent. Martha, waiting outside the door, covered her mouth when she heard. Thank God, she murmured. But inside, Lillian's relief lasted only a moment. Grant's voice echoed down the hallway, sharp and irritated. This is ridiculous. My wife is overreacting. She always does. No. He appeared in the doorway, flanked by a lawyer in an expensive suit. The nurse blocked his path. Sir, you can't be in here. I can go wherever I want, Grant snapped. I pay for this hospital. Dr. Carter turned, her patience gone. Out! Now, you're jeopardizing my patient. Grant's jaw tightened. Your patient is my wife. Don't forget who signs the bills. Lillian's voice came out hoarse, but clear. Grant, stop. The room froze. He looked at her, surprised by the force in her tone. You should be resting. Her eyes burned with quiet fury. I should be safe. For a long moment, no one moved. The sound of the monitor filled the silence, each beep a reminder of life continuing despite everything. Grant's lawyer leaned in, whispering, Let's leave before this becomes public. Grant adjusted his tie, glared at Dr. Carter, and stepped back. You'll regret this, he said softly, before walking out. When the door shut, the tension drained out of the room. Dr. Carter exhaled slowly. He won't come back tonight, she said. Lillian's head fell back on the pillow. Her eyes glistened with exhaustion. Thank you, she whispered. Dr. Carter smiled gently. Rest. You and your baby are fighters. Outside, the rain turned heavier, tapping the window like distant applause. In the corridor, Martha sat under the fluorescent light, phone pressed to her ear, giving her statement to the police. Her voice shook but stayed firm. Yes, I saw it all. The woman in red kicked her chair. The husband laughed. Inside the ICU, Lillian's breathing slowed. The machines hummed in steady rhythm, a fragile lullaby that filled the sterile air. Her eyes drifted toward the window, where city lights shimmered through the rain. They looked like stars sinking into puddles. For the first time since the fall, She felt something shift inside her, not just pain, but clarity. The laughter, the shame, the whispers at the party, they were still out there. But here, in this small white room, there was truth. Her hand moved slowly to her belly. Beneath the bandages and bruises, there was still life, a heartbeat that refused to stop. She closed her eyes, and for a moment, the sound of the storm faded. All she could hear was the faint rhythm of two hearts beating in the dark. The television screens across America flickered to life just after 7 that evening. The network cut from a commercial to breaking news. The image was grainy at first, captured on a phone, but clear enough to stop every viewer cold. A glittering ballroom, a woman in a red dress, a pregnant woman in light yellow sitting at a table. Then the movement, the kick, the crash of glass, the scream, and finally, the laughter of the man in a tuxedo. The anchor's voice carried the tone of disbelief. "We warn our viewers, this footage may be disturbing. It shows a violent incident during a charity gala hosted by financier Grant Hayes, who is seen here as his pregnant wife falls to the ground. Sources confirm the victim, Lillian Hayes, remains hospitalized tonight." The clip replayed, the crowd gasping, the camera shaking, the faint reflection of the chandelier lights dancing across the marble floor as blood spread near the hem of the yellow gown. The laughter came again, sharp and echoing, then the sound of a woman shouting for help. Within minutes, the video was everywhere, on cell phones, on social media, on every major network. A hashtag appeared at the corner of the screen, #Justice for Lillian. Commentators debated in real time whether wealth had once again buried morality. "This isn't just about one family," one reporter said. "It's about a culture that excuses cruelty when it's wrapped in luxury." Thousands of miles away, in Washington, D.C., the video played on the muted television inside a quiet brownstone. The rain outside brushed against the window, steady and soft. A single desk lamp lit the room where Jonathan Hayes sat, surrounded by law books and unopened mail. He had retired 2 years earlier from the federal bench, but his posture still carried the weight of the robe he once wore. He reached for the remote and turned the volume up. The reporter's voice grew sharper. Authorities confirmed that the footage was recorded by event manager Martha Green, who immediately called 911 and remained with the victim until emergency personnel arrived. Investigators are now reviewing the video as potential evidence of felony assault. Jonathan froze. His eyes moved to the television again. The camera replayed the moment in slow motion. The red dress, the flash of a heel, the yellow gown folding as the woman fell. Even blurred, he recognized the face. The glass of water in his hand trembled. He set it down without realizing. "Lillian," he whispered. He hadn't said her name aloud in months, not since their argument. He had warned her about Grant, told her that charm and ambition often came dressed as love. She had refused to listen. "You judge everyone by the law," she had said that night. "You never see the human being behind it." And so he had walked away, believing silence might teach her what words could not. Now silence mocked him. He leaned closer to the television as a new clip appeared. A reporter stood outside Street Helena General Hospital. Flashbulbs exploded around her. "Mr. Hayes has not yet issued a statement," she said. Witnesses claim he appeared indifferent during the incident. Meanwhile, the victim remains in critical condition. Sources tell us the unborn child's fate is uncertain. Jonathan turned off the television. The sound of rain filled the room again, gentle and relentless. He sat motionless, staring at the black screen where moments ago he had seen his daughter fall. His chest ached with something deeper than shock. Guilt was a slow, precise blade. On his desk lay a framed photograph. Lillian, in her graduation gown, smiling with the confidence of someone who believed the world was kind. He picked it up, tracing the edge of the glass. The phone on the desk buzzed. A name flashed across the screen: Nathan Brooks, the lawyer who had worked beside him for years before Jonathan retired. He answered without greeting. "You've seen it?" Nathan's voice was low. "I have. She's still alive. The hospital's on lockdown. The press won't leave the gate." Jonathan closed his eyes. "Who did this?" "The mistress, apparently, Evelyn Ross." And the husband stood there laughing. "The footage is undeniable." There was silence between them. Outside, thunder rolled far away. "John," Nathan said finally, "they'll bury this if we don't act." You know how fast money can make evidence disappear." Jonathan's gaze returned to the photograph on his desk. "Then we won't let them." He ended the call and stood. His knees cracked slightly, a reminder of age, but his movements were steady. He crossed to the old cabinet near the wall and pulled open the drawer that had not been touched since his retirement. Inside lay a small wooden gavel, polished smooth from years of use. He lifted it carefully, feeling its familiar weight. For the first time in years, his hands stopped trembling. He placed the gavel into a worn leather case, along with a few files he had never truly stopped keeping: notes on corporate fraud, false testimony, the ways the powerful twist justice until it no longer recognizes itself. On the muted television, the network resumed coverage. The camera now showed protesters gathering outside the hospital, holding signs that read, "Protect her," and "Money is not morality." Jonathan paused to watch. The world was reacting. The world cared. But he knew outrage burned bright and faded fast. Real justice required patience, structure, and a voice that could not be ignored. He turned off the lamp. The room fell into shadow except for the faint glow from the television. His reflection appeared on the screen, overlapping with the frozen image of Grant Hayes laughing at the gala. Two men, mirrored by light and guilt. Jonathan whispered to the empty room, "You raised a daughter stronger than your silence." He took his coat from the rack and slipped it on, buttoning it slowly, methodically. Outside, the rain had turned to mist. The streets glistened like wet glass. He stepped out into the night, pulling the door closed behind him. The cold air bit at his face, but it felt clean. Down the block, Union Station glowed with its pale arches and steady hum of engines. As he walked, his mind repeated the image: Lillian's fall, the crowd frozen, the yellow gown against the marble. It replayed again and again, each time carving something deeper inside him. At the platform, he purchased a ticket to New York. The attendant handed it over without recognition, unaware that the man before him had once sentenced the country's most powerful criminals. Jonathan looked down at the printed destination, then at the darkness stretching beyond the tracks. A whistle blew. The lights of the approaching train shimmered through the fog. He tightened his grip on the leather case. "If justice won't come to her," he said quietly, "then I'll bring it myself." The train roared into the station, and he stepped forward into the beam of its light. The morning after the broadcast, every newspaper in New York carried the same image. A woman in a red dress, frozen mid-motion, her heel inches from a collapsing chair, and beside her, a man in a tuxedo smiling. Beneath it, bold letters screamed across the page: "The Kick That Shook Manhattan." The story had already escaped local gossip. It was a national debate now. Talk shows dissected it from every angle. Some hosts demanded justice. Others questioned whether the video was edited. Wealthy friends of the Hayes family called it a misunderstanding, while ordinary viewers called it cruelty caught in crystal light. The internet split like a wound. Under every post, thousands of comments multiplied. Some offered prayers for Lillian. Others called for boycotts of Hayes Capital. But all agreed on one thing: the image was unforgettable. Inside the Hayes penthouse overlooking Central Park, Grant watched the footage again on mute. His reflection stared back at him from the television screen, pale and furious. "Turn it off," he said. His lawyer, a heavy-set man in a navy suit, hesitated. "It's everywhere, Grant. You can't stop it now." "Then find a way," Grant snapped. "Call the networks. Tell them it's fake." "They already verified the source," the lawyer said quietly. "It came directly from the event manager, Martha Green." Grant's jaw tightened. He poured himself another drink, though it was barely 10 in the morning. "Everyone has a price. Find hers." The lawyer gathered his briefcase without answering. Damage control starts with a statement, something human, remorseful. Grant laughed once, bitterly. Remorse is for people who lose. Across the city, Evelyn Ross sat in her apartment, surrounded by untouched takeout boxes and unopened wine. The video looped on her phone, each replay cut deeper. Her friends had stopped answering her calls. The modeling agency had suspended her contract. The only message she had received that morning was from Grant: "Stay quiet. I'll handle it." She stared at the message for a long time before throwing the phone against the wall. The sound of shattering glass echoed through the empty room. Outside, reporters crowded her building, shouting her name as flashes of cameras pierced through the blinds. While the city boiled with headlines, Jonathan Hayes moved quietly through the corridors of Street Helena General. He had arrived before sunrise, using credentials that still carried weight even after retirement. The nurses recognized him instantly. "Judge Hayes," one said, "your daughter's stable, but we're keeping her under observation." He nodded, his face unreadable. Through the glass window, he saw Lillian lying still, her hands resting on the small curve of her stomach. Machines blinked softly beside her. He didn't enter, not yet. He turned instead to the waiting area where two men in suits stood speaking in low tones. Nathan Brooks joined him a moment later. "They're from the district attorney's office," Nathan said. "They've seen the video too." Jonathan's voice was measured. "Then let's make sure they see more than a video. We'll need witnesses, the event records, security footage from the hotel." Nathan nodded. "Martha Green's ready to cooperate. She called the station herself this morning. She wants to meet." By noon, they met Martha at a small cafe near the hospital. She looked exhausted but determined, her hands still trembling slightly as she set her phone on the table. "I didn't mean for it to go public," she said. "I only gave it to the police. Someone must have leaked it." Jonathan's gaze softened. "You did the right thing. That recording may save my daughter's life." Martha exhaled shakily. "I just couldn't stand there and let people lie. She didn't fall. That woman kicked her, and he laughed. I heard it." "We'll need your testimony," Nathan said gently. "Every detail you remember." Martha nodded. "You'll have it." She slid a USB drive across the table. "This is the original file, unedited, time-stamped. Keep it safe." Jonathan accepted it carefully, like a fragile truth. "We will." Then, that same afternoon, the video resurfaced again on television, this time accompanied by new commentary. The network confirmed the source and aired an extended version showing the seconds before and after the assault. Viewers saw Evelyn's approach, the exchange of words, and the moment Grant turned his head to laugh. The reaction was explosive. In living rooms, diners, and office lobbies across America, people stopped what they were doing. The footage ran on repeat, each frame fueling outrage. A former prosecutor on air called it a textbook example of aggravated assault. Donations flooded online for Lillian's medical care. Others demanded an independent investigation into how the police had handled the case. By evening, protesters gathered outside Hayes' Capitol headquarters carrying signs, "Justice for Lillian. Money isn't immunity." A reporter's live segment caught Grant arriving at the building under heavy security. Cameras swarmed his car. One journalist shouted, "Mr. Hayes, did you laugh while your wife was bleeding?" Grant ignored them, pushing through the crowd, his face hard as marble. Inside, his public relations team waited with panic in their eyes. "You need to speak," one said. "The silence is killing you." "I don't owe anyone an explanation," he replied. "They'll forget in a week." But they didn't forget. By nightfall, the video had reached over 50 million views. Celebrities shared posts condemning the violence. Religious leaders spoke about moral decay behind polished walls. Even the mayor released a statement supporting a full and fair investigation. At the hospital, Jonathan and Nathan sat across from two detectives reviewing the USB drive. The older detective leaned back after watching the clip. "I've seen a lot of things in my career," he said, "but I've never seen someone smile like that while his wife bled." "Lee." Jonathan's voice was calm but edged with steel. "Then make sure the world doesn't look away." The detective nodded. "We'll open a formal case. Assault and possibly conspiracy if we find collusion." Martha sat nearby, silent, watching the rain slide down the window. "They won't touch him," she said softly. "People like that never pay." Jonathan looked at her. "They will now." He rose from his chair, his silhouette framed against the storm-lit glass. The city outside was a blur of red and blue lights from news vans and police cars. Inside the hospital, the hum of machines echoed faintly, steady and patient, like the heartbeat of the story itself. Back at the newsroom, Harper Lane prepared her segment. She adjusted her microphone, stared into the camera, and began. "Tonight, new evidence deepens the scandal surrounding Grant Hayes. The video released by event manager Martha Green shows not an accident but deliberate cruelty. America is watching. And waiting." The camera's red light blinked once, then faded. Across the city, screens glowed, faces leaned closer, and the world held its breath. The soft beeping of monitors was the first sound she heard. It pulsed steadily in the darkness, patient and mechanical, like a metronome keeping time for her return. Lillian Hayes opened her eyes slowly. The world above her came into focus one piece at a time. White ceiling tiles, a fluorescent light humming softly, the faint reflection of rain sliding down a window. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. Then the pain came, low and deep, a reminder of everything that had happened. Her hand moved instinctively to her belly. Bandages pressed against her skin. A quiet fear rose through her chest until she felt something. Movement, faint but real. She gasped. A nurse standing nearby noticed immediately. "Easy," the nurse said gently. "You're safe, Mrs. Hayes. The baby's still with us." Tears gathered at the corners of Lillian's eyes. "Still?" The nurse nodded. "Still. You both made it through the night." Lillian exhaled, her breath trembling. She tried to speak again, but her voice cracked. The nurse smiled softly and adjusted the pillow behind her head. "You've been asleep for almost 2 days. Try to rest." The door opened quietly. Dr. Emily Carter stepped in, her white coat brushing the edge of the curtain. Her expression was calm but warm, the kind of face that could steady a storm. "Good morning, Lillian," she said. "Or afternoon, depending on how you count it. How do you feel?" Lillian blinked away the blur. "Like I fell from somewhere high." "That's not far from the truth," Dr. Carter said. She checked the monitors and the IV line, nodding with approval. "Your vitals are stabilizing. The baby's heart is weak but steady. You're both fighters." Lillian's gaze drifted toward the window where sunlight was starting to pierce through the clouds. The light was soft and golden, the same color as her gown from that night. "Did he come?" she asked quietly. Dr. Carter hesitated. "Your husband came by briefly, yes. He was asked to leave. He wanted to discuss paperwork, not your health." Lillian's lips parted, but no words came. She looked away, focusing on the slow rhythm of her monitor. "There's something else," Dr. Carter said after a pause. "Your father's here." Lillian froze. "My father? He arrived this morning. He hasn't left the waiting area. He wanted me to tell you before he came in." Memories flickered. Arguments. Silence. The way her father's voice could cut through a room like a verdict. She hadn't spoken to him in nearly a year. "I don't know what to say to him," she murmured. "Then don't say anything yet," Dr. Carter said. "Just let him be here." The doctor left quietly. For a few minutes, Lillian listened to the rain, the machines, her own uncertain breathing. Then the door opened again. Jonathan Hayes entered slowly, his gray coat damp at the shoulders, his expression composed, but his eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep. He stopped at the foot of the bed, as though afraid to cross an invisible line. "You're awake," he said softly. She tried to sit up, but pain shot through her side. He moved closer, steadying her pillow, without touching her too much. The distance between them was filled with everything they had never said. "I saw the broadcast," he said finally. His voice was steady but hollow. "I shouldn't have needed a television to see what kind of man he was." Lillian's throat tightened. "I thought I could fix it. I thought if I tried hard enough, he'd change." Jonathan shook his head slowly. "Men like that don't change. They only wait for the world to stop watching." The silence that followed was fragile. Then he sat in the chair beside her bed, folding his hands. "You look like your mother when you sleep," he said quietly. "Strong even when you're broken." Lillian smiled weakly. "You're still quoting courtroom poetry." He gave a faint smile in return. "It's all I know." For a while, they just listened to the rain. The light outside shifted, turning the window pane into a sheet of gold. Jonathan leaned forward. "You've been brave enough to survive. Now you have to be brave enough to fight." Lillian looked at him, confused. "Fight how?" "Legally, publicly. They're already trying to bury the story. But there are good people helping. Your doctor, that event manager Martha Green, the lawyer Nathan Brooks. I'm working with them." Lillian's breath caught. "You came all the way here for me." "For justice," he corrected gently, then softer. "And for you." She looked down at her hands. The IV tape pulled slightly at her skin. "I'm scared, Dad." "So am I," he admitted. "But fear isn't failure. It's just the first thing you feel before you do what's right." Liebe. Her eyes filled again, but this time the tears didn't fall from grief. They fell from relief. She reached out slowly, and he took her hand. His was rough and warm, a steady weight anchoring her to the world. "Promise me something," she said. "Don't fight him for revenge. Fight him because he almost killed something innocent." He nodded. "Justice isn't revenge, Lillian. It's protection." The words settled between them, simple and unshakable. Hours passed quietly after he left the room. Nurses came and went. The rain stopped. The light turned softer, bending through the curtains in thin gold lines that stretched across her bed. Lillian stared at them until her eyes blurred. For the first time since the fall, she let her mind drift toward hope. When night came, Dr. Carter returned for one last check. She smiled at the readings on the monitor. "You're improving faster than I expected," she said. "Can I ask you something?" Lillian said. "Of course. List. When you saw me that first night, did you think we'd make it?" Dr. Carter paused. "I thought you'd fight harder than anyone else could, and I was right." Lillian smiled faintly. "Thank you for saving us." "I just did my job," Dr. Carter said, adjusting the four. "The rest was you." After the doctor left, Lillian stared again at the ceiling, counting the rhythmic beeps of the monitor. She thought of the ballroom lights, of Martha's trembling hands, of her father's voice saying justice was protection. Somewhere deep inside her, a new strength began to take root. Outside the window, the moon climbed over the city, turning the wet streets silver. The faint hum of the hospital blended with the heartbeat monitor until it sounded almost like music. She closed her eyes, her hand resting on her belly, whispering to the life inside. "We're still here," she said softly, "and we're not done yet." The monitor beeped in steady agreement, filling the quiet room with a rhythm of survival that refused to fade. The rain had stopped by morning, leaving the city washed and gleaming. Sunlight spilled through the high hospital windows, catching the edges of Lillian Hayes's light yellow gown as she sat up for the first time without help. The pain was dull now, no longer consuming her, just a reminder of what she had survived. Dr. Emily Carter stood beside her bed, flipping through a clipboard with cautious satisfaction. "You're healing well," the doctor said. "Your vitals are stable. The baby's heart rate is stronger than it was 2 days ago." Lillian smiled faintly. "She's stronger than both of us." Dr. Carter looked up, the corners of her mouth softening. "You'll be discharged today, but you'll need to avoid stress. That includes the press waiting outside." Lillian's heart tightened. "They're still there?" "They haven't left since the arrest warrant rumors started," Dr. Carter said. "Your father's already spoken to the district attorney. Things are moving fast." "Lou?" Lillian brushed her hand over the blanket, tracing the wrinkles in the fabric. "Fast isn't always safe." "Maybe not," Dr. Carter replied, "but sometimes it's necessary." She paused, then added quietly, "You'll be escorted out through the back entrance. Your father will meet you there." Lillian nodded, grateful but heavy with thought. When the doctor left, she turned toward the mirror across the room. The woman reflected there looked different. Her face was thinner, her eyes quieter but sharper. The bruises had faded, leaving behind the kind of beauty that comes only from endurance. She touched her stomach gently and whispered, "We're almost out." An hour later, she signed the discharge papers. The pen shook slightly in her hand, but her signature was firm. A nurse folded the hospital gown into a bag and handed her a set of soft clothes that Margaret Carter, one of the attending nurses, had found. Over her light dress, she draped a cream-colored coat that hid her silhouette but not her grace. As she stepped into the hallway, reporters' voices echoed faintly from outside the hospital doors. The sound was muffled but constant, a low tide of curiosity. Lillian held her breath as security guided her toward the elevator leading to the back exit. Downstairs, Jonathan Hayes waited near the ambulance bay. His posture was straight, his eyes steady, but there was a hint of exhaustion in the lines around his mouth. When he saw her, his expression softened. "You're walking," he said quietly. "Barely," she answered, smiling weakly. He held out his arm, and she took it. They walked side by side through the corridor that led to the service exit. At the end of it, sunlight poured through glass doors, sharp and bright, like an invitation. Before they reached the exit, a small crowd gathered. Nurses, doctors, even a few patients in wheelchairs. Dr. Carter stepped forward. "Mrs. Hayes," she said, "the world outside may be loud, but remember that not everyone watching is against you." Lillian nodded, touched. "Thank you for everything. Take care of yourself." Dr. Carter said, "and let the law take care of the rest." Outside, the flash of cameras waited like lightning. Security guards opened the doors. The hum of voices turned into a roar. "Mrs. Hayes, Lillian, how are you feeling? Do you plan to press charges? Is it true your husband is being investigated for obstruction?" The questions collided in the air. Lillian paused on the steps, the sunlight catching her hair, her yellow dress glowing faintly beneath the coat. She blinked against the brightness, then looked directly at the nearest camera. "I'm grateful to be alive," she said softly, her voice steady but resonant. "And I'm grateful for the people who refuse to look away. That's all I want to say for now." The reporters leaned closer, but security led her forward. Jonathan placed a protective hand at her back as they crossed to the waiting car. The crowd parted just enough for her to pass. Some onlookers clapped quietly. Others simply watched with the silence of awe. When the car doors closed, the noise outside faded. The city became a blur beyond the tinted windows. Lillian leaned her head back, exhaling deeply. "I didn't think I could face them," she admitted. "You didn't have to," Jonathan said. "You just had to stand there." The car drove toward the courthouse district. Billboards loomed overhead, some still displaying Grant Hayes' luxury brand campaigns. His face smiled down from them, confident and untouchable. But now the smile looked hollow. At a red light, Jonathan glanced at the headlines flashing on a nearby newsstand. "Federal prosecutors confirm ongoing investigation into Hayes Capital," one read. "Possible charges of witness intimidation," said another. He adjusted his glasses. "The tide's turning," he murmured. Lillian looked out the window. A protest had formed outside Hayes Capital headquarters, people holding signs that read, "Justice for Lillian" and "No More Silence." She pressed her palm against the glass. For the first time, she felt the city was breathing with her. Back at the hospital, Martha Green gave her statement to detectives. The footage had been authenticated, the timestamps verified. Later that afternoon, the district attorney's office filed formal charges: assault, reckless endangerment, coercion. At the same time, Grant Hayes stood in his office surrounded by his lawyers. His phone buzzed endlessly with calls from investors, board members, and reporters. He ignored them all. Sweat gathered at his temples. "They can't touch me," he said, pacing. "Actually, they can," one of his lawyers replied. "The federal warrant is being processed right now. Once it's signed, the arrest will be immediate." Grant stopped pacing. "Who authorized it?" "Judge Robert Mills," the lawyer said. "He's old colleagues with your father-in-law." Grant's expression froze. "Her father?" "Yes," the lawyer confirmed. "He's helping the investigation." The room went silent. Outside the tall windows, the skyline stretched endlessly, but for the first time, Grant felt trapped. Meanwhile, in the car, Jonathan handed his daughter a file. "These are the formal papers. The DA's building the case on multiple counts." Lillian hesitated before taking it. "I don't want to see him in handcuffs. I just want him to stop." "He won't stop until the law stops him," Jonathan said. "That's why we keep going." The car slowed near the courthouse plaza. Jonathan looked at her, eyes filled with quiet pride. "You're free to choose what happens next, but whatever you choose, you're not alone anymore." Lillian opened the door. The light hit her face full force, warm and fierce. She stepped out, lifting her chin slightly. Cameras clicked from across the street. Somewhere in the distance, church bells rang noon. For the first time, the city didn't feel hostile. It felt awake. As she stood there, the wind lifted the hem of her yellow gown beneath the coat, and the fabric shimmered faintly in the sunlight. She looked up toward the courthouse dome and whispered to herself, "Let it fall." Her father heard her but said nothing. He only followed her gaze to the sky, where clouds were breaking apart, letting streaks of light pour through like a promise not yet kept. The morning air over Manhattan was sharp and bright, carrying the hum of traffic and the low murmur of anticipation. Outside the towering glass headquarters of Hayes Capital, dozens of reporters gathered behind barricades, cameras ready, microphones raised. Overnight, the district attorney's office had confirmed the federal arrest warrant. The city was waiting for the moment it would become real. Inside, on the top floor, Grant Hayes adjusted his tie in the reflection of the window. The skyline stretched before him, glittering and cold. He had not slept. His lawyers had called through the night, but their words had blurred together until they sounded like static. All he could hear now was his own breathing, quick and shallow. Evelyn Ross paced the room behind him, barefoot, her red dress from the night before replaced by a black suit that didn't quite fit. Her hair was unbrushed, her face pale. "Grant, we need to leave the city," she said. "They're saying the FBI's involved. If we go now—" He turned sharply. "We're not running. The cameras are outside. If they see me leave, it'll look like guilt." "It already looks like guilt," she shot back. "They have the video. They have witnesses. They have your father-in-law." Grant's eyes flashed. "He's retired. He has no power anymore." "Then why is the judge signing your warrant?" For a moment, silence filled the room. Grant looked down at his desk. The framed photograph of him and Lillian on their wedding day lay face down. The glass cracked from where he had slammed his hand hours earlier. He picked up his phone, scrolling through headlines. "Federal arrest expected today. Hayes Capitol faces collapse. Justice for Lillian becomes national movement." The words blurred together. Evelyn moved closer, lowering her voice. "We could disappear for a while. Private plane, cash. I still know people. Leo." He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw fear in his eyes. "If I run, I lose everything." "You already lost everything," she said softly. Downstairs, the building's lobby buzzed with tension. Employees whispered near the elevators, phones in hand, ready to record what was about to happen. 2 security guards tried to keep order, but the crowd was growing. Outside, a line of black SUVs appeared at the curb. The lead vehicles stopped, and men in dark suits stepped out, their badges flashing briefly in the sunlight. The crowd erupted into shouts. "They're here!" someone yelled. Upstairs, Grant looked toward the window just as the distant sound of sirens reached him. His chest tightened. He tried to convince himself it was coincidence, that they were just passing through the avenue. But the sirens grew louder. He turned to Evelyn. "Stay calm. Say nothing. Let me handle this." Her eyes darted toward the door. "You don't handle anything anymore." Before he could respond, the phone on his desk began to ring. He didn't answer. The sound filled the room, insistent and shrill. Then came another sound. The elevator dinged. The doors opened. 4 agents stepped out, followed by 2 uniformed officers. Their movements were precise, their expressions unreadable. The lead agent held up a folder. "Grant Hayes?" Grant straightened his jacket. "You're making a mistake." "Light." The agent's voice was firm. "Mr. Hayes, you are under arrest for assault, witness intimidation, and obstruction of justice. Please place your hands where I can see them." Evelyn gasped, stepping backward. "Wait, he didn't mean—" "Miss Ross," the second agent interrupted. "You are also under investigation for aiding and abetting. You'll need to come with us." She froze. "What? No, I didn't do anything." "He told me." The words dissolved into sobs as the agents moved forward. Cameras outside the glass walls began flashing wildly. Through the windows, the skyline seemed to lean closer, as if the whole city were watching. Grant tried to keep his composure. "You can't arrest me in my office. I'll cooperate. My lawyers are on their way." The agent took out the handcuffs. "This isn't a negotiation." The metallic click echoed through the room as the cuffs locked around his wrists. Gasps rippled among the employees gathered in the hall. Some recorded quietly on their phones. Others just stared. Grant's face hardened. "You think this makes you heroes? You're pawns in someone else's game." The agent guided him toward the elevator. "That may be true," he said evenly. "But today, you're not untouchable." As they stepped out of the office, the flashes intensified. Reporters outside shouted over each other, voices rising in a chaotic wave. "Mr. Hayes! Do you have anything to say? Is it true your wife will testify against you? Was the assault planned?" He ignored them, his jaw tight. For a brief second, his eyes lifted to the building across the street. On one of its electronic billboards, a news channel replayed the now iconic clip: Evelyn's kick, Lillian's fall, his laughter. The image froze mid-frame, the light catching his smile. Now, as the camera flashes surrounded him, that smile felt like a curse. Evelyn followed, trembling, escorted by another agent. She tried to shield her face, but the crowd surged forward, chanting. Some shouted insults, others filmed every step. Martha Green stood at the edge of the crowd, watching silently. She had come not for spectacle, but for truth. When Grant passed, their eyes met briefly. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The red and blue lights reflected off her glasses, and she turned away, whispering a quiet prayer. Grant was led into the waiting SUV. The door slammed shut, with a finality that sounded like judgment. Evelyn was placed into another car, her tears streaking the makeup across her cheeks. Across the street, the reporter Harper Lane stood before the cameras, her voice clear and steady. Moments ago, federal agents executed arrest warrants for Grant Hayes and Evelyn Ross. Both were taken into custody under charges related to the assault of Mrs. Lillian Hayes. The arrests mark a turning point in a case that has captivated the nation. Behind her, the scene unfolded like a film in real time. The agents, the flashing lights, the crowd's roar, the chaos of justice catching up to power. In a nearby car parked down the block, Jonathan Hayes watched from behind tinted glass. Lillian sat beside him, her coat folded across her lap, her eyes fixed on the flashing lights. She said nothing, but her hands trembled slightly. Jonathan didn't speak either. There was nothing to say. The moment spoke for itself. When the SUVs began to move, the crowd erupted again. Reporters ran after them, their voices chasing the convoy down the avenue. The reflection of the flashing lights painted the glass towers red and blue, turning the whole street into a mirror of law and consequence. Lillian's eyes stayed on the disappearing convoy until it turned the corner. Then she closed them. Her breath came slow and deliberate, as if she were trying to memorize the sound of justice beginning. The car stayed still for a long time, the city's noise fading into background hum. Somewhere above, church bells began to ring. The courtroom of the United States District Court was already filled when the doors opened. Reporters filled every seat in the gallery, their laptops ready, cameras pointed at the bench where history was about to unfold. The seal of the court hung above the judge's chair, polished and imposing under the light. Every sound carried, the shuffle of papers, the nervous cough of a spectator, the whisper of fabric as people leaned forward. The trial of Grant Hayes and Evelyn Ross had begun. Lillian Hayes sat in the first row beside her father, Jonathan. Her hands were clasped in her lap, steady despite the tremor in her heartbeat. She wore a light yellow dress again, modest but radiant, a deliberate choice that spoke louder than words. The press had nicknamed her the Woman in Yellow, the survivor who turned tragedy into a movement, but to her, the color wasn't about fame. It was about remembering the night she refused to die. On the defense side, Grant sat rigid in a gray suit, his wrists no longer cuffed, but his posture that of a man who couldn't escape even without chains. His eyes flicked toward the rows of cameras, then away. Beside him, Evelyn Ross looked smaller than she ever had, her hair pulled back tightly, her face pale under the fluorescent light. She avoided looking at anyone. Judge Robert Mills entered, and the room rose. He adjusted his glasses as he took his seat. "Be seated," he said. The tone of his voice silenced everything that followed. The prosecutor, a woman named Dana Lewis, stood and began. "Your Honor, members of the jury, this case is not about money, or status, or social perception. It is about violence, humiliation, and the belief that power protects cruelty. The evidence you will see and the witnesses you will hear from will show deliberate harm, not accident, intent, not impulse. Today, the law will speak for those who were silenced by fear." She gestured toward Lillian. "This is Mrs. Lillian Hayes. She was 6 months pregnant when she was assaulted at a public event by Miss Ross, while her husband, the defendant Grant Hayes, laughed. You will hear that laughter in the evidence. You will see the footage recorded by the event manager. You will understand the meaning of indifference." The jury listened intently. Some took notes. Others simply stared at the screen as the prosecutor played the video once more. The sound filled the courtroom, the music, the crowd, the sharp impact, the echo of Grant's laughter. Lillian's stomach tightened. She had heard it countless times, but each replay felt like reopening a wound that refused to close. When the video ended, silence swept through the room. Even the air seemed to hold still. Evelyn's attorney rose, his voice careful and rehearsed. "Your Honor, the defense maintains that Miss Ross acted without malice, and that Mr. Hayes's reaction, however inappropriate, does not constitute criminal intent." The judge nodded slightly. "We'll let the evidence determine that." As witnesses took the stand, the day stretched long. Martha Green was the first. She spoke calmly. her voice shaking only once when she recalled the blood on the marble floor. "I recorded it for documentation," she said. "I never expected the world to see it, but I couldn't let it disappear." Lo. "Did the defendant, Grant Hayes, attempt to help his wife after the fall?" the prosecutor asked. "No," Martha said quietly. "He laughed, and when I called 911, he told me to stop causing panic." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Grant's lawyer objected. "Speculation." "Overruled," the judge said. Next came Dr. Emily Carter. She testified about the injuries, the risk of miscarriage, the surgical procedures that had saved both mother and child. Her professional tone carried more weight than anger ever could. "If the ambulance had been delayed another 10 minutes, she said, neither Mrs. Hayes nor the baby would have survived." Lillian felt her father's hand tighten around hers. He didn't speak, but his silence was an anchor. By afternoon, the defense tried to regain control. They painted Evelyn as emotional, overwhelmed, provoked. "My client regrets what happened," her lawyer said. "But it was an accident fueled by jealousy, not violence." Evelyn finally looked up, her eyes rimmed red. "I didn't mean to hurt her," she whispered. "It all happened so fast." The prosecutor turned to her. "Then why did you kick her chair?" Evelyn's lips trembled. "Because she looked at me like she won." The words hung in the air. The prosecutor stepped back. "No further questions. You." When it was Grant's turn to testify, the room went still. He stood slowly, buttoning his suit, trying to project the charm that had once disarmed entire boardrooms. "I'm a businessman," he began. "I built everything from nothing. I've made mistakes, but I've never been violent." The prosecutor's tone was sharp. "Did you laugh while your pregnant wife was bleeding on the floor?" Grant paused. "I was in shock. People react differently under stress." "Under stress?" the prosecutor repeated. "You smiled, Mr. Hayes. You looked directly at her and laughed." He said nothing. The courtroom waited. His silence was louder than any denial could have been. Judge Mills adjusted his glasses again. "Mr. Hayes, you may sit." As the final evidence was presented, the air grew heavier. Financial documents proved attempts to silence witnesses. Messages between Grant and Evelyn revealed coordination, not chaos. "Delete the footage. Pay her off. This never happened." The words appeared on the screen in bold white letters, illuminated for everyone to see. By the end of the day, the prosecutor's voice softened. "Justice isn't vengeance," she said to the jury. "It's the act of telling the truth aloud, even when it hurts." When the closing arguments ended, Judge Mills leaned forward. "The jury will deliberate." Hours passed. The sun dipped below the courthouse windows, casting long bars of light across the polished floor. Lillian stared at them, her breathing shallow. Every sound, the creak of a bench, the shuffle of shoes, felt magnified. Finally, the bailiff returned. "The jury has reached a verdict." The room filled again. Lillian's pulse pounded in her ears. Grant stared straight ahead. Evelyn clasped her hands tightly, whispering to herself. The foreman stood. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Evelyn Ross, guilty of aggravated assault and conspiracy." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Evelyn's eyes widened, her mouth trembling. The foreman continued. "We find the defendant Grant Hayes guilty of all charges, including obstruction of justice." The room erupted. Cameras flashed. Reporters rushed for exits to send their headlines. Judge Mills struck his gavel once. "Order!" His voice cut through the chaos. Grant's shoulders sagged. Evelyn began to cry. Lillian felt her breath catch. Relief and sorrow collided inside her chest. A storm she couldn't name. The judge's voice steadied the air again. "Sentencing will proceed immediately." He looked down at the two defendants. "Mr. Hayes, 30 years in federal custody. Miss Ross, 25 years, both without parole." Gasps echoed again. Grant lowered his head. Evelyn collapsed into tears. Lillian's eyes burned, but no tears came. Her father reached for her hand again. "It's over," he whispered. But in her heart, she knew it wasn't over yet. Justice had spoken, but life was still waiting to begin again. As the gavel struck for the final time, the sound reverberated through the courtroom, sharp and final. Lillian placed her hand on her stomach, feeling the faintest movement. The baby was still there, still fighting. Outside, sunlight broke through the courthouse windows, flooding the room in gold. The sky over New York was a heavy gray when the sentence was read, but by nightfall, the clouds had cleared. Outside the courthouse, the crowd slowly dispersed, leaving behind a quiet that felt both sacred and strange. Inside, the echo of the gavel still lingered in Lillian Hayes's mind. 30 years for Grant. 25 for Evelyn. The words had sounded unreal when the judge spoke them, like a line from someone else's story. But now, as she stepped out into the cool air, it felt real. The noise, the fear, the weight, all of it was beginning to lift. Her father walked beside her, silent. Reporters called out her name, but she didn't answer. She just kept walking until the courthouse steps gave way to the street. The city lights shimmered in puddles left by the afternoon rain. For the first time in months, the reflection looking back at her didn't seem broken. By the time they reached the car, her body trembled from exhaustion. She leaned against the door for a moment, closing her eyes. "It's over," she whispered. Jonathan Hayes opened the door for her. "Almost." She nodded faintly and slipped inside. The car moved through the city at a slow, steady pace. Every street corner held memories of something she had lost, but tonight they no longer hurt. They were just places she had survived. When they passed the hospital, she looked up. The lights in the maternity wing glowed softly. She thought of the heartbeat she had heard through the machines, the fragile rhythm that had kept her anchored through every trial and headline. That same heartbeat pulsed faintly beneath her hand now. It reminded her that even justice couldn't stop the life waiting to arrive. Hours later, she was home, or at least what was left of it. The penthouse she had once shared with Grant stood empty. The lawyers had seized it as part of the investigation. Her father refused to let her return there. Instead, he had found a quiet townhouse on the Upper West Side, where the air smelled of rain and coffee from the cafe next door. Dr. Emily Carter had helped her move in. She had filled the fridge, stocked the cabinets, and left a note on the counter that said simply, "You're safe now." That night, the quiet was overwhelming. The city hummed beyond the walls, distant but comforting. Lillian sat on the couch, her hands resting on her belly, her body heavy with the nearness of birth. Her father had fallen asleep in the chair across from her, his head tilted slightly, the old weariness in his posture softened by peace. Then the pain started. It came like a sudden wave, sharp, relentless, certain. She gasped, clutching the armrest. For a moment, she tried to convince herself it was just another ache, another false alarm. But the next contraction came harder. Her breath hitched. "Dad," she called softly. He stirred instantly, his old instincts returning. "Lillian, it's time," she said through clenched teeth. He was already up, grabbing his coat. "I'll get the car. Stay still." Within minutes, they were back on the same streets that had carried them to hospitals before. But tonight was different. There were no cameras, no sirens, no flashing lights, only the rhythmic pulse of tires on wet pavement and her shallow breaths counting between contractions. At Street Helena General, nurses met them at the entrance. They had been expecting her. Dr. Carter arrived within minutes, calm as ever, her presence filling the room with quiet authority. "We're ready," she said. "Let's bring this child into the world." Lillian gripped her father's hand as the pain intensified. Sweat slicked her forehead. The contractions came closer together now, each one pushing her toward something beyond fear. The doctor's voice was steady. "You're almost there, one more." Outside, rain began again, light and cool. The city seemed to hold its breath. Lillian screamed once, then fell silent. The sound that followed was small and fragile, but it filled the room completely. A cry, thin, uncertain, alive. Dr. Carter smiled beneath her mask. "It's a girl." The nurse wrapped the newborn carefully and handed her to Lillian. The tiny body was warm and trembling, her face scrunched in confusion at this new world. Tears rolled down Lillian's cheeks as she pressed her lips to the baby's forehead. "Grace," she whispered. "Your name is Grace." "No." Her father stood beside her, motionless at first, then lowering himself into the chair. His hands shook as he reached out to touch his granddaughter's tiny fingers. "She's perfect," he said quietly. Lillian looked at him through her tears. "She's the reason I lived." He smiled faintly. "No, you lived so she could be born." For a while, no one spoke. The storm outside softened to a steady drizzle. The machines around them hummed quietly, recording new life in delicate numbers and lines. Lillian felt the weight of the baby's heartbeat against her chest. It was steady and strong. Dr. Carter checked the monitors one last time before leaving. "Both of you are healthy," she said. "Rest. You've earned it." After she left, The room dimmed to a warm glow. Jonathan remained by the window, staring out at the city. "You know," he said softly, "when your mother died, I thought I'd never believe in miracles again. But this," his voice broke slightly, "this proves I was wrong." "Why?" Lillian smiled, rocking the baby gently. "Miracles don't come when we expect them. They come when we finally stop running." Her father turned from the window, his expression tender. "And sometimes, they come when justice has finished its work." The baby stirred, letting out a soft whimper. Lillian soothed her, whispering, "You're safe now. You're safe." Outside, the rain began to lighten. A faint glow appeared over the horizon, a promise of morning. For the first time in a long while, Lillian let her shoulders relax. She wasn't thinking about trials or headlines anymore. Only the warmth in her arms, the heartbeat against her skin, and the quiet assurance that the worst was finally behind her. She looked at her father, who had fallen asleep in the chair again, his head leaning against the wall, the faintest smile on his face. She whispered, "We did it." The baby's breathing steadied in rhythm with her own. The sound filled the small room, tender and eternal. Lillian closed her eyes and listened, the weight of every battle fading into peace. The world outside was still turning, still imperfect, but here, in this quiet space, everything had finally found balance. The clock on the wall ticked once, twice, and the city moved gently into dawn. Morning sunlight spilled through the tall windows of the cafe, painting the walls in shades of gold and cream. The sign outside read Grace and Light Cafe, written in simple white letters that glowed softly against the glass. A small bell chimed as the first customers walked in. The smell of roasted coffee beans and freshly baked bread filled the air, blending with the quiet hum of conversation. Lillian Hayes stood behind the counter, wiping a cup with calm, deliberate movements. Her light yellow dress, now a symbol rather than a memory, fluttered gently as she moved. It had been a year since the trial, a year since the noise of headlines and courtrooms had faded into silence. The world had moved on, but for Lillian, peace had taken time to learn. The cafe was her answer to that silence. It wasn't a business built for profit, it was a refuge. Every woman who worked there had a story like hers, stories of fear, of survival, of beginning again. They didn't talk about the past much. They didn't have to. The smell of coffee and the sound of laughter did the healing for them. Grace, now almost walking, toddled between the tables with a small wooden spoon in her hand. Her curls bounced as she laughed, her giggle ringing through the room like music. Customers turned and smiled, some recognizing her from the news stories that had once broken hearts across the country. She was the child born after justice, the little heartbeat that refused to stop. Lillian knelt and lifted her daughter into her arms. "You're supposed to be napping, little troublemaker," she whispered, pressing a kiss to her forehead. Grace giggled again and reached for her mother's necklace, the same one she had worn the night of the gala. Lillian had kept it not as a reminder of pain, but as proof of endurance. A soft voice called from the doorway, "We're out of cream again. Late." It was Martha Green, carrying a box of supplies. She looked stronger these days, the exhaustion in her face replaced with quiet purpose. She had become Lillian's closest friend, helping her run the cafe from the first day it opened. "I'll order more this afternoon," Lillian said. Martha smiled. "Already done. You've taught me to plan ahead." They both laughed, a sound of comfort rather than relief. For months, they had worked side by side, building something gentle from the ruins of cruelty. Every table, every chair, every cup had been chosen with care. But one chair, placed near the front window, carried more meaning than all the rest. It was an old wooden chair, repaired and polished until the grain shone like honey. A small brass plaque on the backrest read, "No one has the right to break a mother." It was the same chair that had fallen that night, the same one that had started everything. Sometimes, when the cafe was quiet, people would sit there just to think. No one spoke when they did. It wasn't about tragedy anymore. It was about resilience. Lillian placed Grace on her hip and walked toward the chair. Sunlight touched the wood, making it glow. She traced her fingers across the plaque, remembering the sound of her own heartbeat in that ballroom, the way light had turned red against her dress. But the image no longer haunted her. It was simply part of the story that had brought her here. The doorbell rang again. A new customer stepped in. a woman in her 40s with tired eyes and hesitant steps. She looked around as if unsure whether she belonged. "Welcome," Lillian said gently. "Please, have a seat." The woman hesitated, then pointed toward the wooden chair. "May I sit there?" "Of course," Lillian replied. The woman sat down, her hands trembling slightly around the cup Martha placed before her. "I read about you," she said after a while. "About what happened. About how you forgave them." Lillian smiled faintly. "Forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about deciding that the pain doesn't own you anymore." The woman's eyes filled with tears. She nodded silently. Across the room, Jonathan Hayes entered quietly. He had aged a little more, his hair whiter, his steps slower, but his presence was steady. He greeted the staff with a kind smile before sitting by the window. Grace wriggled out of her mother's arms and ran toward him. "Grandpa!" He caught her easily, laughing as she climbed into his lap. "You're getting faster every day." Lillian approached the table, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Black, no sugar," she said, setting one down. "Still remember," he said with a smile. "I try." They sat in silence for a while, watching Grace stack sugar packets into a tiny tower. The afternoon light filtered through the window, catching the dust in soft, golden motion. "She looks just like you," Jonathan said quietly. Lillian smiled. "I hope she has your strength." He shook his head. "No, she has yours." They drank their coffee slowly, the silence between them warm and full. Outside, the street was busy, but inside the cafe, everything felt suspended in calm. After a while, Jonathan stood. "I have to get to the courthouse. Old habits die hard. They asked me to give a lecture about moral law." Lillian laughed softly. "You'll tell them about justice again?" He leaned down and kissed her forehead. "I'll tell them about mercy." When he left, the door closed gently behind him. Lillian watched him disappear into the flow of the city, her heart full. She turned back to Grace, who had returned to her tower of sugar packets. The bell above the door chimed again, and sunlight swept across the room. Lillian glanced toward the wall behind the counter where a photograph hung, a picture of the cafe's opening day. In it, she stood beside Martha, Dr. Carter, and her father, holding Grace in her arms. Beneath it was written, "Out of darkness, light." She ran her fingers over the frame, then looked around the cafe. Every table was full now. People laughed. The smell of cinnamon and coffee filled the air. The world, at least here, felt right. Grace tugged at her skirt. "Mama, up!" Lillian lifted her, resting the child against her shoulder. The little girl's tiny hands pressed against her mother's cheeks. "You're home," Lillian whispered. Outside, the sun dipped lower, casting long golden lines across the street. The repaired chair near the window gleamed one last time before the light faded. Lillian looked at it and smiled, her eyes bright with quiet peace. For the first time, the story wasn't about what had been broken. It was about what had been rebuilt. The cafe door closed softly, and the sound of laughter mingled with the hum of the evening. Somewhere in the city, church bells began to ring again, the same rhythm as a heartbeat that had never stopped.